The devil's in the tide. The waves crashed steadily over the beach like a pressing hand. The salt water retracted back, leaving the sand smooth and new. Each time the waves swept over the sand, they erased all crevices or imperfect footprints. Each time the waves kept making the beach whole again. Jerry watched the last of his footprints disappear into the brand new sculpted sand, his thoughts raging. He stared up into the darkening sky and could already hint the oncoming rain. It always rained, it seemed, just like yesterday and the day before that. He was visiting Cower, Rhode Island, that night, or for that week, for one reason and one reason only. He was there to be with his fiancée Elaine just for 2 weeks. She was attending State Cower University for the semester, and Elaine had told him she had vacation time coming up that March if he wanted to fly on up. Jerry wasn't going to college, not at the moment. He wanted to take a year off before he did so because high school was about all he could bear. He needed a break, but Elaine had been eager to attend college, and Cower U seemed to be her calling. She had lived in Rhode Island all her childhood and wanted to be closer to her mother. So Jerry let her go, and 6 months later, here he was, both of them staying at her mother's until her 2 weeks break was up. A week had gone by at Elaine's old household, and he made do for her. But there was only 1 week left with her, and he'd have to fly back to Colorado and wait 1 month for her semester to be over. Then from there, she'd fly back to Colorado for the wedding. The next day, Elaine told Jerry they would go out to eat together and then put together a list of people who would attend the wedding. She had hopped in the shower, and Jerry darted past her parents and went for a quick walk on the beach. As he walked, he thought about how he had woken up that morning to find a new pair of Dockers slung across the chair by Elaine's old desk. On the desk was a box of new shoes, a pair of loafers. Still, Elaine's parents were trying to change his appearance. Jerry stared out at the sparkling ocean and started to get chills running up and down his spine. He strode to the shore and let the cool water seep over his toes. He kicked off his sandals and stepped away from them. They were old and beaten, and he could admit that he had needed new ones. Their soles were peeling off, and the Velcro had long ago lost its stick. He threw the 2 battered sandals into the curling waves and watched the current slowly take the bobbing dots deeper outwards. Then Jerry walked back to meet Elaine and hoped when he came in he wouldn't see her mother sitting at the kitchen table with sharp scissors to cut his long hair. Invitations were bought, and the list of people to be invited were made after lunch. Elaine noticed the loafers on Jerry's feet, and she was stupefied. "What's up with those? Where's your sandals?" Elaine asked, brushing back her long red hair. "I decided to pitch the sandals, but I'll get new ones," Jerry answered. "Good, because loafers aren't a good look for you." We paid the bill at the restaurant and went home. Elaine later helped prepare dinner, and Jerry scooted out. He crossed the boardwalk and stopped. A rabbit lay dead in the middle of the street, its lower half smashed into a pancake. The slightest hint of its guts were poking out of its slack mouth. Jerry winced unpleasantly. He loved animals. That was part of the reason he was a vegetarian, and whenever he saw something like that, he felt his hippie side cry out in dismay and bitter longing. He stepped over the roadkill and paused on the beach. He made his way to the shore, searching for what wasn't there. After scanning the entire beach, he realized that he was late for dinner. He gave up on the hunt and made his way for the boardwalk. A heavy crashing wave startled him and forced him to turn. Once the tide had started to pull back in, a new blanket of smooth sand and a pair of sandals were revealed. Jerry jogged toward them and inspected the footwear. Even though the sandals had just been brought in from the ocean, they were completely dry and brand new. The soles were reattached, all the stitching was replaced, the Velcro was stickier than ever, and the padding inside wasn't worn out like before. Jerry looked down upon his shoes, perplexed, sweat dripping down his brow furiously. He flipped off the loafers and jumped into the sandals, fresh and somehow renewed. He tossed the loafers into the trash, deciding he better make for home. Then he came across the dead rabbit again, and his heart filled with dread. Such a poor, small creature, such an unexpected loss. Then he stopped, his train of thought thinning away. He hovered over the rabbit that lay in its own blood, his sweat running off his nose and chin. Without a second thought, he bent down and scooped the dead creature in his hands. He was going to find out for sure. He was going to prove to himself once and for all if this was real or not. He sprinted back to the beach, the dead rabbit's head lolling lifelessly between his palms, blood pooling around his fingers. He crouched down on the wet sand, the waves spreading out around his knees. His hands lowered to the water, and he relaxed his fingers. The rabbit floated there in the current, dazed eyes staring up blankly at Jerry. Its ragdoll body was slowly but surely pulled into the tide, each minuscule wave pushing the rabbit's corpse deeper into the current. Jerry watched the barely noticeable gray smudge on the horizon blink out as if it had been brutally pulled into the depths. Jerry knew that was crazy because the spot the rabbit disappeared was within standing depth, so there was nothing that could have plucked a rabbit from the waves, could there? It just sank, that's all, he thought, but Jerry wasn't sure. Where the rabbit had been came an explosion of air bubbles that plumed up to the surface quickly, and just like that, they were gone. The next morning, Jerry sat down at the breakfast table, gnawing on a piece of toast. Elaine left the table to clean herself up, so it was Jerry and Elaine's parents alone at the table. When Elaine was past earshot, her father turned towards Jerry, squinting through his bottle-top glasses. Jerry dropped his toast and locked eyes with the old man. "Listen, Jerry, I love my daughter, and I love you in a sense," the old man said graciously. "I don't know, though. I get the impression that you don't care for us too much, and I've tried to like you since I met you last December, but you're not giving me enough to work off of." Jerry only sat stunned. "We're only trying to help," the old lady chimed in. "We want what's best for our daughter, and we're trying to help her see the best of you." "She already knows the best part of me," Jerry countered. "She loves me for who I am." "Yes, but are you sure you need to walk around the way you are? You look like a bum," she said in a small voice. "What does it matter the way I look?" Jerry snapped. "Do you have to only eat salads all the time? I mean, what kind of man doesn't eat meat?" the father barked. "A conscious man," Jerry burst out. "It's just our daughter has only been eating vegan, and that can't be healthy," her mom whispered. "It's very healthy. I won't have my daughter marrying a no-good tree hugger." Jerry's face fell, and Elaine's mother burst into tears. Now the gloves were off. They didn't resent him for his appearance, but because of his lifestyle. These people had the nerve to question his beliefs and his love. "If you want to marry my daughter, you have to think about a better way to live. Get a job for God's sakes. Go to college and give up that whole flower power crap. You're 20 years old, Gerald. Grow up." Then her father was silent, his eyes directed to his lap. Jerry only turned away and burst out the front door. "Jerry? Honey?" Elaine yelled out, following him down the walkway. Jerry didn't answer. He crossed the street and made for the boardwalk, but he stopped on the other side of the road, his heart pounding, his ears still ringing from Elaine's screeching cry. There the rabbit stood by the entrance to the boardwalk, its beady eyes focused on him with sheer concentration. Its fur looked finely combed and completely dry, yet it stared at him like it knew who he was, like it knew he had saved it. Jerry wasn't entirely sure it was the same rabbit until it started to hop away with a limp on the leg that had once been smashed into its mangled fur. Jerry gasped, and the rabbit reared its head back at him, its floppy ears swinging. Water started to pour out of its eyes like tears and out of its nose in long streaks. Then it seemed to smile at him, its ugly mouth slack. Water streamed out like a spigot pooling around the sidewalk. "Jerry?" He turned around swiftly and saw it happen so quickly he didn't even have time to comprehend it. A car came within inches of hitting her, but at the last second the Jeep swerved around her, the driver honking and cursing at Elaine as she sprinted across the street. She jumped forward as the car passed, and one flailing foot went into the gutter. Feet from where Jerry stood. Her legs snapped at the shin, and she teetered over the gutter, her foot lodged, while the other slipped out from under her. Jerry jumped, but she hit the concrete and hard. Her head smashed into the sidewalk, and it did not bounce. It just stuck there, blood splattering the street. Jerry got down to his knees and lifted her up, listening to the snap of her shin as he raised her up to eye angle. Her head lolled onto her shoulder, her skull exposed, her cranium gushing blood like a fountain. Her eyes remained closed, her mouth slightly agape. He searched for a pulse and found a fleeting one. He started to get up to run back to inform her parents when his eyes caught the rabbit again. This time it was on the driveway of Elaine's house, grinning human-like, water still seeping out from between its yellow, green teeth. Jerry scrambled onto the street with Elaine's upper body still balanced on his forearm. He reached down into the blood-soaked gutter and wrenched Elaine's sneaker from the grate. Then he scooted back onto the sidewalk and lifted his fiancée into his arms. He checked her pulse again on her neck, then on her wrist, and got a fluttering beat. He sobbed as he started back for the house. But the rabbit sat on the front porch this time by the open door, black button eyes never leaving Jerry. He turned to the boardwalk and to the beach beyond. He looked back at the house, and the rabbit was gone. He nodded as if to answer the rabbit's unasked question. He pivoted and took off toward the beach, passing only a few beachers who watched him with shocked, bulging eyes. He continued on, though, his dying fiancée swinging briskly in his trembling arms. Her shorts and blouse were now drenched with blood. Her sneaker was now stained red, even though it had once been white. All the way he sobbed as the orange sun set behind him. He splashed into the water, stumbling and slipping through huge splashes of salt. His foot sank into the soft sand, but still he splashed powerfully through the current. Waves smashed him on the thighs like small fists, and somewhere in the chaos he lost his sandals again. Soon he was wading up to his chest, his clothing sticking to him like adhesive. That's where he carefully laid Elaine down into the water, his tears dripping on her creased forehead. She immediately started to sink, her legs first, and then her chest. He yelped out as he pushed her dead weight away from him. He pressed his ice-cold hands onto his face as Elaine drifted further and further away from him. All that was exposed on the surface was Elaine's stony face and still chest, as his blurry eyes watched her figure some 50 yards away. Two milky white hands shot out from under the ocean like rogue arrows and wrapped themselves around Elaine's chest. Then they pulled, and just like that, Elaine was under the tide. Jerry's legs kicked furiously, and once he was beyond standing depth, he started to swim, arms slicing through the tepid water like small daggers. He started to thrash about, water filling his lungs as he screamed. He started to spurt and retch as he swam, his clothes weighing him down considerably. His jeans felt like 100-pound weights strapped to his legs. He still screamed, and soon his breath was torn out of him like a vacuum. His strokes became slapping open-palmed thrashes into the water. His legs stopped kicking and his shoulders became limp. He turned to see if anyone on the beach was trying to rescue him, but the shore was gone. There was no beach, there were no people. All around him was ocean, with no sign of civilization anywhere. He tried to scream, but his throat was choking on water. He could start to feel his body sinking, his cries diminishing, his vision blurring. Soon he was looking through a tint of blue, expanding water, colorful reefs and grinning gray fish situated below him. Then, when the salt water began to sting his eyes, he shut them, and they didn't open again. Jerry shivered violently and swung out from his sleep. He coughed, water spitting out from his gullet. He placed his palms on the solid ground he sat on and jumped in surprise. The ground was freezing cold. He looked down through his teary eyes and saw what he was sitting upon was ice. He got shakily to his bare feet, wincing from the freezing standing place. He looked around and saw he was standing on a towering piece of ice that overlooked the ocean. With more careful examination, he realized he was standing upon a 3-story iceberg out in the middle of the Atlantic. "Hello, my love." Jerry spun around and his bare feet slipped out from under him. He hit the iceberg hard, bringing stars to his eyes. Standing there on the other end of the iceberg was Elaine, smiling lovingly at him. Her blue eyes shone with her usual breathtaking intensity, her hands clasped behind her back as she always used to do. Her blouse was no longer blood-stained and her brain was no longer exposed. She was just there, brand new and real. Jerry leapt to his feet and slid to her, taking Elaine in his arms. She was solid and warm. "You're alive," Jerry sobbed, his fingers running through her hair. "Yes, Gerald, she's alive and well." Jerry tore out of his love's arms and turned to look at a spot that had been empty a second ago. There stood a man dressed in black jeans and a plaid shirt. He had a gold belt buckle that gleamed brilliantly. He wore rubber galoshes and a cowboy hat perched on his head. The man grinned, his eyes a terrifying orange. His teeth were gray and rotting. He had the slightest hint of a beard on his face, his arms folded neatly over his chest. "Howdy," he said, grinning through his rotting teeth. Jerry grimaced. "I had a hand in this, I must admit," he cackled. "Nice to meet you, friend," he said, holding out his hand. He was too far away to reach Jerry, though, so he started to slide forward on the ice without moving his feet or legs in any way. When he was in arm's length, Jerry slowly lifted his own hand, and the man clutched it heartily. Still, he grinned. "What do I want?" he asked, his eyes seeming to glow like orange suns. Elaine continued to smile next to Jerry, as if she had been reacquainted with an old friend. "Well, I did give you back your wife, and then I saved your life. Oh, I'm a poet. I didn't even know it." He laughed, which didn't sound human one bit. It sounded like a growling chainsaw slicing at metal. Jerry put his hands to his ears and yelped painfully. Next to him, Elaine laughed like a small child. "All I want to do is reunite you with your fiancé, and that is all," the man replied, holding out his arms. "You can be with her freely without changing yourself drastically. You can be free with her." "How did you—" "But you have to do something for me first," the man said dreamily. "What?" Jerry asked. He turned to Elaine, who was now grinning. Salt water leaked through her locked teeth. It ran down her cheeks, What did you do to her? Well, that's the price of going into business with me, he said. His face looked different suddenly. It looked waxy, as if it was polished like a jewel. Just a slight casualty, but when I'm done with you, you won't notice at all. What do you mean? Then Elaine grabbed both his hands and secured them behind his back. Jerry screamed into the afternoon sky as liquid hands started to rise up from the murky waters below. They reached out toward the sun, translucent fingers splayed out like large fins. The ocean started to churn, waves crashing at the iceberg brutally like hammers. Whirlpools burst into life all around, sucking at the great crystal dice, and the whirlpools were like mouths filled with jagged teeth. Still the arms reached out at the sky, rising far above Jerry's head. The man belched laughter in front of him, his face starting to melt. His clothes liquefied like dripping wax and ran off his body. His face became clear like the water, and Jerry could see the black storm clouds starting to stack on top of each other behind him in the sky. Lightning streaked through like jagged cracks in the Earth's atmosphere. The man's eyes sank back into nothing and his features smoothed like a clean slate. His body then became a tall figure, faceless, and built entirely of clear water. The figure slithered towards him, its lobster-like claws reaching out. "Gone fishing, right?" the man cackled. "Sometimes we wish, after we catch a fish, we could throw them back. But you just can't resist keeping it, am I right?" Jerry tilted his head to the side to look at his beloved Elaine, smiling lovingly at him with those glorious eyes, that wonderful perfume wafting up into his flared nostrils. He couldn't leave her. He couldn't depart. He wasn't going to throw her back. "Yes," he whispered, his head drooping. The faceless figure laughed delightfully and grasped his shoulders with both of its wet lobster claws. The smooth face of the ocean creature pressed against his own, like a mask. For a moment Jerry and the man were one, and he knew all the creature's hidden thoughts and mysterious pasts. It had many lives and many faces, but only one name. He was a dealer of the best kind. He was a pusher of the worst kind. And Jerry learned that the hard way. Then the thing's liquid body pressed through his clothes and over his skin like a liquid body suit. Then the world was shut off like a light, and all Jerry saw was blue. Elaine was a small dot on the horizon, and he ran to her. "Where did Elaine get to?" her father growled behind his morning paper. "Did she even come home last night?" "Well, George, we really started something foul last night, and I can't blame her for being angry at us," the mother replied dryly. The front door burst open and two figures appeared in the doorway. The parents turned to the sounds of footsteps and the lurking of shadows on the carpet. "Elaine, Gerald, that you?" Elaine's father asked. Elaine and Jerry turned the corner and stood in the doorway of the kitchen. Elaine's folks gasped. Elaine and Jerry weren't solid, but clear as water. They looked like spirits that grinned wickedly, and they seemed to melt as well, water pooling around their translucent feet. They both laughed in unison, water spraying out of their mouths. The old woman cried out. The translucent people slithered forward into the kitchen. The old man belched as wet, solid fingers wrapped around his throat. In turn, Elaine wrapped her tentacles around her mother's wrist. Their cries of pain became gagging gurgles before silence. All there was blue. The ball of fire in the sky started to set in the west, igniting a beautiful blanket of purple to envelop the sky. It threw orange streaks over the ocean's surface, tiny stars of light twinkling and dancing along with the rolling waves. On the beach, two people, a man and a woman, walked toward the shore, heads on each other's shoulders, arms tightly wound together. The two lovers walked into the rising tide, hand in hand, moving into their new home, their new life. The two heads in the ocean finally plunged down into the depths, leaving no sign for anyone to follow, except for the sets of footprints that ran into the crashing waves. And still the waves swept steadily over the beach, erasing the footprints, molding the sand, and making it new.